It was 1944, and the Pacific Ocean burned with the fury of a world at war. The horizon was a scar of smoke and flame, where steel leviathans roared, and the air trembled with the echoes of distant bombardments. Amid this chaos, one ship sailed quietly through the fire, not the largest, not the most famous, but one that would etch its name in the silence between cannon fire and courage. The USS Massachusetts, known affectionately as a Big Mamie, was no headline hero. She was built for war but lived for duty. A fortress of steel that guarded fleets, silenced enemy guns, and shielded men who never knew her name. When the great battleships of the Pacific thundered their might, the Iowa, the Missouri, this unsung titan moved through the waves like a guardian no one noticed but everyone depended on. The sea around her was littered with the wreckage of ambition, and yet she endured. Every blast, every strike, every tremor of the guns carved her legacy not in glory but in endurance. She was the silent power beneath the storm, the unseen strength that allowed victory to rise. And as history moved on, as fame found other names, Massachusetts remained anchored in time, proud, patient, and quietly. This is the story of the most underrated American battleship of World War II, a war machine that fought not for recognition, but for survival, for honor, and for every man who believed in the silent steel beneath his feet.
Launched in the shadows of greater names, the USS Massachusetts entered the war with quiet determination, born not from glory but necessity. In the summer of 1941, as the world burned in every direction, the shipyards of Quincy, Massachusetts, thundered with life. Sparks flew like stars across steel hulls, the clang of hammers rang against the Atlantic wind, and men worked day and night to turn sheets of metal into floating fortresses. They knew the urgency. Every bolt, every weld carried the weight of war. Out of that feverish labor emerged a vessel that would come to embody silent endurance, the USS Massachusetts BB-59, a South Dakota-class battleship, designed not for fame but for function. She was a machine of strength, built in secrecy while the world held its breath, unaware that within her frames and armor plates lay the heart of one of America's most steadfast warriors. Her birth was marked by the rhythm of wartime America, a rhythm of sacrifice, speed, and precision. The men who built her were not poets, not heroes in uniform, but ordinary workers forging history with their hands. They wiped sweat from their brows as rivets hissed into place, knowing that each turn of the wrench brought the nation one step closer to readiness. The Massachusetts rose steadily from the dry dock, her gray hull gleaming under the shipyard lights, her turrets massive, her guns yet to speak. The ship's launch in September 1941 was not accompanied by grand parades or lavish celebration. There was a solemn pride in the air instead. A sense that she was not born to impress, but to endure. When the attack on Pearl Harbor came just 3 months later, it was as if destiny had knocked early. The United States was thrown into a war it had long feared and half expected. Across the Pacific, ships burned in silence, their smoke blackening the skies of Hawaii. But on the cold New England coast, the Massachusetts waited, new, untested, and impatient to serve. Her crew assembled, young men from across the country, farm boys, factory workers, and students, suddenly transformed into sailors. They stepped aboard with eyes wide, hearts racing, hands trembling as they touched the cold steel that would become their home. Every corridor smelled of oil and salt, every echo carried the hum of potential. To them, she was more than metal, she was safety, she was strength, she was a promise. By mid-1942, the Massachusetts steamed into the Atlantic, her gray hull slicing through the waves like a blade of resolve. The world around her was chaos, yet her movement was precise, deliberate. The engines below deck pulsed with power, her boilers roaring like a caged beast, pushing her forward toward war. Her destination was Casablanca, North Africa, the site of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion that would mark America's first major offensive against Axis forces in the European theater. The crew, though new to battle, had trained tirelessly for this moment. Every gun crew drilled until their arms ached, every sailor memorized emergency procedures in case the sea became their grave. The air was thick with tension, but also with pride. The Massachusetts was about to test her mettle. On November 8, 1942, dawn broke over the African coast. The sky was gray, the water restless, and far ahead lay the port of Casablanca, guarded by Vichy French forces loyal to Germany. The Massachusetts took her position among the invasion fleet, her massive 16-inch guns trained toward the horizon. Silence hung over the ship like a breath waiting to be exhaled. Then, at exactly 7:04 a.m., her first salvo thundered into the sky. The roar was deafening, the deck shuddered beneath the crew's boots, and the shockwave rolled across the ocean like a living thing. Her shells screamed toward the shore, and moments later, the distant coastline erupted in fire. The Massachusetts had spoken, her voice deep, commanding, and final. For hours she rained fire upon the enemy. Her main guns, each weighing over 100 tons, rotated with precision as the gunners worked with machine-like discipline. Below decks, loaders heaved shells the size of men into chambers glowing with heat. Sweat streamed down their faces as the air filled with the tang of gunpowder and oil. Above, officers shouted bearings, spotters called out impacts, and through it all, the Massachusetts kept her rhythm: fire, recoil, reload, fire again. Her target was the French battleship Jean Bart, a powerful vessel moored in the harbor. The two giants exchanged thunder across the sea, each strike sending geysers of water and smoke into the sky. But the Massachusetts was faster, steadier, deadlier. Within minutes, her shells found their mark, smashing into the Jean Bart and silencing her guns. The victory was decisive, yet it came without fanfare. There were no dramatic speeches, no triumphant cheers. The crew simply carried on, checking systems, tending to the wounded, and preparing for the next wave of orders. To them, it was duty, nothing more, nothing less. But history would later remember that morning as the day the USS Massachusetts fired the first American 16-inch shells of World War II and became the first U.S. battleship to engage in combat since Pearl Harbor. Her performance was flawless. Not a single shell malfunctioned, not a single major system failed. She had proven herself not through legend or myth, but through cold precision and relentless will. After Casablanca, she continued her voyage across oceans, escorting carriers, shielding convoys, and protecting transports laden with men and supplies. She was not a ship of headlines but of heartbeats, the silent rhythm of an industrial empire moving as one. Every night, as the world slept in uncertainty, the Massachusetts carved her path through the dark seas, her lights dimmed, her guns manned, her radar sweeping the horizon for enemies unseen. Storms battered her decks, enemy submarines stalked her from the depths, yet she pressed on. Her steel hull bore the scars of sea and war, but never surrender. She was the embodiment of American endurance, a creation of necessity that had become a symbol of quiet greatness. In the long months that followed, her name appeared in official communiques and naval records, but rarely in newspapers. The headlines went to others: the Enterprise, the Iowa, the Missouri. The Massachusetts worked without glory, a guardian without a crown. Yet within her steel corridors, there was pride, the pride of those who knew what she had done. Her crew understood that while fame faded, purpose endured. They saw the ship not as a weapon, but as a companion, one that protected them through storms, through fire, through nights when the world seemed to vanish into smoke and fear. Back home, her story was whispered in shipyards and family kitchens. Mothers read the brief Navy dispatches, wives traced the ship's name on maps, children dreamed of fathers somewhere beyond the horizon. The Massachusetts became a name that carried quiet comfort, the idea that their loved ones were safe aboard something strong, steadfast, and unsung. In an age when heroes were made of headlines, she remained a hero of silence. Her return to port after the African campaign was without ceremony. The crew stood on deck as the ship glided into the gray Atlantic mist, her guns at rest, her hull bearing streaks of soot and salt. Dockworkers paused to watch her arrive, nodding silently. They knew what she had done. She was more than just a ship, she was proof that strength didn't need applause to matter. The welders who had built her now saw their work return home alive, a piece of America that had faced the storm and come back unbroken. Even as the war expanded to the far Pacific, the Massachusetts was already carving her legend quietly, her record one of precision, endurance, and loyalty. Every sailor who served aboard her carried stories that no headline could capture: the sound of the guns at dawn, the hum of engines through sleepless nights, the unspoken bond between man and machine. She had no need for myth. She was living proof that some heroes speak not through words, but through action. The Pacific would test her steel like no other ocean could. When the USS Massachusetts left the familiar gray waters of the Atlantic and entered the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, she entered a new world, a world where heat, salt, and danger never slept. The Pacific theater was the heart of the storm, where war was not fought in tidy lines but in sudden bursts of chaos, smoke, and fire. Here, distance itself was an enemy. Islands lay scattered like stepping stones across an ocean so wide that it could swallow fleets whole. The men aboard the Massachusetts quickly learned that every mile forward was a risk, every sunrise a challenge, and every sunset a question of survival. Yet through it all, the ship moved like a heartbeat, steady and strong, her engines driving forward through waves that mirrored the uncertainty of the world. She was built for this, for punishment, endurance, and faith. Her heavy armor was her skin, her guns her voice, her crew her soul. As she joined the Pacific Fleet, the men aboard began to feel the weight of what they represented. They were no longer defending coasts or escorting convoys. They were part of the great march toward the heart of the Japanese Empire, toward the final reckoning. The war in the Pacific was unlike anything the sailors had known. Heat pressed down like a physical weight, and salt crept into every seam, every breath. Below decks, the air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and steel. Above deck, the horizon seemed endless, and the silence before each battle was almost unbearable. The Massachusetts became more than a machine, she became a fortress of survival in an ocean that wanted to consume everything. By 1943, she was part of the great offensive movements that carried the Allies from one island to another, from the Gilberts to the Marshalls, from the Carolines to the Philippines. Each battle was a test of endurance. Days and nights blurred together as the ship provided fire support for landings, bombarded shore positions, and guarded the carriers that launched aircraft toward distant islands. The roar of her guns became the rhythm of war. Her 16-inch rifles could hurl shells weighing over a ton each, tearing through concrete, rock, and metal as if the earth itself could be broken open by her will. Each time they fired, the ship shuddered as though she shared the pain of her own power. The deck trembled, the air split with thunder, and the sea around her rose in protest. Yet through it all, the Massachusetts never faltered. She stood her ground like a living mountain amid storms of steel. The enemy fought fiercely. Kamikaze attacks, air raids, and submarine ambushes became part of daily existence. There were moments when the sea seemed alive with fire, streaks of tracers cutting through the night, the distant rumble of explosions echoing across the water. On deck, gunners stood ready at their anti-aircraft stations, scanning the skies for the faint silhouette of an enemy plane diving from the sun. The sound of the general quarters alarm became second nature, a sound that sent every man running to his post, hearts pounding, hands trembling only for a second before. Training took over. The ship's anti-aircraft guns barked relentlessly, filling the air with smoke and brass. The crew fought with precision, guided by discipline and the unspoken bond that had grown between them and the ship that carried their lives. Below the chaos, deep in her steel belly, the engineering crews worked in heat that would break most men. The temperature below decks often climbed past 100 degrees, the roar of the turbines and boilers deafening, the floor vibrating constantly beneath their feet. The men there rarely saw the horizon. They fought a different kind of battle, one against exhaustion, machinery, and time. Every pipe had to hold, every valve had to function, for one mistake could mean death not from enemy fire, but from the ship's own heart failing. Yet they carried on, sweating through their uniforms, covered in grime and oil, their faces streaked with soot. They were unseen heroes, the lifeblood of the Massachusetts, keeping her alive through storms and strikes alike. As the war deepened, so did the bond between the crew and their ship. They began to speak of her as if she were alive, as if she felt what they felt. When a bomb missed by yards, they said she had ducked. When the sea grew calm after battle, they said she was resting. To the men aboard her, the Massachusetts was more than metal and machinery, she was protection, memory, and endurance made real. Letters from home arrived rarely, and sometimes weeks passed without word from the outside world. But the ship never let them feel alone. Her constant vibration, her hum through the decks, was a reminder that they were part of something larger, something steady amid chaos. The Pacific sun baked her decks during the day, and the night brought only the dim glow of battle lanterns and the scent of salt carried on the wind. There were times when the Massachusetts moved silently, engines humming low, cutting through black water under a sky full of stars. The sea shimmered faintly, and the sailors who had a moment to breathe would stand by the railings and look out into the darkness, their minds filled with thoughts of home. The stars above them were the same stars that shone over their families, their towns, their country. It gave them comfort, even as they knew that somewhere beyond the horizon, the enemy was preparing another strike. The worst moments came not when shells fell from the sky, but in the hours of waiting, the long, tense stretches between radar contacts, between reports from scouts, between orders. The silence before combat was a kind of torture. The crew would stand ready, every nerve tight, every muscle braced. Then the orders would come, and the ship would awaken, guns rotating, spotters shouting, engines surging. The first explosions would tear through the silence, and all fear vanished in the mechanical rhythm of survival. The Massachusetts knew her role and played it with unflinching precision. Her guns spoke for her. Her armor absorbed the punishment meant for others. She was the shield of the fleet. There were moments of loss too. Men fell in battle, some swept overboard, others caught in explosions or fires that ripped through sections of the ship. Each loss was felt deeply. The crew held brief ceremonies when they could, lowering flags, offering prayers, and committing their shipmates to the sea. The sound of the waves became the final hymn. The Massachusetts bore those losses in silence. The next day, the next hour, the next minute, she would continue to fight. Grief was a luxury the sea did not allow. In those brutal months of 1944 and 1945, as the Allies closed in on Japan, the Massachusetts stood as a wall of steel in countless operations. She provided bombardment support for the invasions of the Marianas, Leyte Gulf, and Okinawa. Her guns leveled enemy fortifications, and her presence gave confidence to every ship and landing craft nearby. Her very silhouette on the horizon was a comfort, a reminder that there was strength behind them. During air raids, she fired thousands of rounds, creating curtains of flak that lit up the sky. Japanese pilots feared the accuracy of her gunners. Her systems functioned with flawless discipline. Her crew had become one with her machinery. Each new dawn revealed scars on her hull, dents from near misses, patches welded hastily after battle. But those scars became part of her story. They were marks of survival, proof that she had faced the fury of the Pacific and remained standing. The sea salt that crusted her bow and the smoke stains along her superstructure were like medals earned in silence. She did not seek praise, and she received little. The great carriers and the famous battleships captured the world's imagination. The Massachusetts carried the burden of necessity, doing what needed to be done without ever stepping into the light of fame. Yet to the men who served aboard her, there was no greater ship. They knew her worth in every moment she kept them alive. When the war began to turn in favor of the Allies, and the end drew near, the Massachusetts was still there, constant, vigilant, and ready. She had fired thousands of shells, steamed tens of thousands of miles, and guarded countless lives. Her logbook was thick with operations, each page a story of duty fulfilled. There were no moments of vanity, no recorded boasts. Her legacy was written in her silence, in the calm after each storm when she floated battered but unbeaten. For those who looked closely, she was the embodiment of the American spirit, enduring, disciplined, relentless. As the war approached its final chapters, the Massachusetts continued her duty with the same steady resolve. She was there when the last desperate kamikaze attacks came, her gunners weary but unbroken, her decks littered with spent casings. The smell of gunpowder clung to her steel. The sky above was streaked with smoke trails that faded into nothing, the sea below littered with fragments of wreckage. The crew stood watch over a world that was slowly falling quiet. They had seen too much, endured too much, to celebrate yet. They simply carried on, as they always had, until the order came to stand down. When peace was declared, it did not come with cheers aboard the Massachusetts. It came with silence, a silence so deep it felt sacred. The men looked around at the ship that had carried them through everything, at the decks that had been their battlefield and their home. They touched the steel, now cool and still, and felt gratitude beyond words. They knew they had lived through something immense, something that would echo through time. The Massachusetts had not sought glory, but she had achieved greatness through endurance, through loyalty, through the simple fact that she had never failed when it mattered most. She sailed home not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. Her wake stretched behind her like a signature written across the ocean, the mark of a ship that had done her duty without hesitation. The Pacific had tested her steel, her men, and her soul. And she had endured it all, silent and strong, the embodiment of America's quiet resilience. In her shadow, thousands of men had lived and fought, and through her strength, countless others had survived. She was the unspoken giant of the Pacific, a warrior whose story was written not in parades or headlines, but in the deep, unending rhythm of the sea. When the guns finally fell silent and the Pacific lay still beneath the weight of victory, the USS Massachusetts returned home with a dignity that needed no fanfare. She had steamed thousands of miles, traversed storm and fire alike, and her steel hull bore the evidence of battles fought with precision and resolve. The ship was scarred but unbroken, a living testament to endurance, loyalty, and the quiet courage of those who served aboard her. Unlike the carriers that basked in headlines or the battleships whose names became symbols in newspapers, the Massachusetts was a vessel of steadfast purpose, a guardian whose heroism was measured not in fame, but in survival and protection. Her return was a silent procession of strength across the ocean, waves breaking along her bow like applause muted by distance, a tribute reserved for those who understood the sacrifices she embodied. As she approached the American coast, veterans and dockworkers alike could see the story written into her hull. Each dent, each scar of paint peeled by shrapnel, each line of rust from prolonged exposure to salt and heat spoke of countless nights under fire, of thousands of shells fired, and of the lives preserved through her presence. Men who had served aboard her spoke in hushed tones of her steadfastness. They remembered the mornings when dawn rose over the horizon and the ship cut through mist like a blade, guns ready, engines humming with a steady heartbeat. They remembered the nights when the sea was black and still, only the faint glow of lanterns on deck marking her silhouette, and they could feel her power and resolve beneath their feet. The Massachusetts had become more than steel and rivets. She was memory incarnate, a fortress that carried the weight of an entire fleet on her shoulders and did so without complaint. Her legacy was not built in moments of spectacle but in the countless hours of quiet, unrelenting duty. The Pacific had demanded constant vigilance, and the Massachusetts had delivered it without pause. During the campaigns from the Marianas to Leyte Gulf, from the Philippines to Okinawa, her guns had provided critical shore bombardment, softening enemy fortifications before infantry landed. Her presence shielded carriers and troop transports from relentless air attacks, and her anti-aircraft batteries tore through the skies with a disciplined fury. Yet while others captured the world's imagination with dramatic raids or cinematic headlines, the Massachusetts maintained her composure, executing orders with the precision of a clock, her crew becoming an extension of the ship itself. Every man aboard understood that glory was fleeting, but survival, theirs and that of those they protected, was eternal. After the surrender of Japan, the ship's purpose shifted from combat to preservation. The veterans who remained aboard looked upon the Massachusetts with reverence, knowing that she had carried them through a war that tested every limit of courage and endurance. Her decks, once filled with the roar of guns and the chaos of battle, were now silent, yet they vibrated with the memory of the countless missions she had completed. Her massive 16-inch guns, capable of hurling tons of metal over miles of ocean, now stood idle, but their presence spoke louder than words ever could. The ship had performed flawlessly, protecting men, destroying targets, and maintaining her position as a sentinel over the Pacific. She had endured the fury of storms, enemy attacks, and the merciless rhythm of war itself, and she had emerged not merely unscathed, but triumphant in the quietest and most essential way possible. The men who had sailed with her carried the memories of that endurance long after they stepped ashore. They remembered the smell of salt and oil that clung to her steel, the vibration of her engines through the decks, and the precise rhythm of her guns that had become the heartbeat of every operation. Letters sent home were filled with descriptions of her might, of the silent reassurance she provided during storms and attacks, of the comfort found in knowing that beneath them was steel capable of withstanding almost anything. For the crew, the Massachusetts was not just a ship, she was a protector, a constant in a world of unpredictability, a silent witness to their courage, fear, and hope. In the years following the war, as the world moved forward and newer ships claimed headlines, the Massachusetts found her place in history not as a spectacle but as a symbol of steadfastness. She was eventually preserved at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts, where visitors could walk her decks, touch the steel that had survived the Pacific, and feel the echoes of history in every corridor and turret. Her guns remained imposing, her superstructure rising proudly against the sky, and her hull bore the visible reminders of her service. Veterans returned to her, often in silent reflection, sometimes to point out familiar posts, to show grandchildren where they had stood, or to relive moments of fear and triumph alike. The ship had become a bridge between past and present, a vessel of memory, teaching all who came aboard that heroism does not always wear the face of fame. Even today, the Massachusetts stands as a monument to the unheralded victories of World War II. She represents the countless ships and crews whose contributions were essential but often overlooked. Her very existence reminds visitors that endurance, precision, and loyalty can be as heroic as any headline-making action. Standing upon her decks, one can imagine the sun rising over the Pacific, waves crashing along her hull, guns poised and ready, and a crew moving in flawless rhythm. One can hear the echo of distant artillery, the shouts of officers, the disciplined steps of sailors, and feel the presence of a machine that gave everything and asked for nothing in return. She is the embodiment of silent heroism, proof that greatness can exist without recognition, and that the measure of a battleship is not in fame, but in the lives it protects and the wars it endures. In Battleship Cove, the Massachusetts draws thousands of visitors every year, yet her story remains quieter than the legends of carriers and other famed battleships. Children climb her ladders, imagining themselves as sailors on the deck of a floating fortress, while veterans stand in solemn reflection. The paint, though restored, still hints at the weathering and battles she endured. Her guns tower above, silent now but still awe-inspiring, her massive turrets frozen in time as guardians of history. Every rivet and weld holds a story of sweat, discipline, and survival. Every corridor resonates with the footsteps of men who trusted her completely, knowing that she would see them through fire and storm alike. The Massachusetts is more than a museum piece. She is a living memory, a ship that teaches the lessons of courage, endurance, and the quiet dignity of duty. Her legacy, though understated, endures in the hearts of those who served and those who come to learn from her. Unlike ships that gained fame in the media, the Massachusetts earned admiration through the lives she safeguarded and the missions she completed without fail. She demonstrated the power of steadfastness in a theater of chaos, showing that a battleship's worth is measured not in newspaper headlines, but in the safety of the sailors she carries, the precision of her fire, and the unwavering consistency of her performance. In the end, she became a symbol of the silent warriors of the sea, those who fought, endured, and protected without the applause that history sometimes reserves for the more conspicuous names. She had served America with excellence, yet she asked for no recognition beyond the satisfaction of duty done. Even as modern ships sail into the future, the USS Massachusetts stands as a bridge between eras, a reminder of the steel and courage that defined her generation. Visitors can walk her decks, feel the weight of the guns, trace the lines of the armor, and imagine the roar of battle that once filled the air. Veterans can recall their own stories, children can dream, and historians can study the intricacies of her construction, but none can fully capture the essence of what she was. A silent protector, a faithful companion, a battleship whose name may not have dominated headlines, but whose impact resonated through every operation she undertook. She embodies the truth that history often remembers the loudest, but the greatest contributions are sometimes the quietest, carved in steel and courage, and carried forward on endless waves. Through her years at Battleship Cove, she continues to teach lessons of resilience and strength. Every visitor stepping aboard learns not only of battles won and distances crossed, but of what it means to endure, to remain steadfast in the face of overwhelming odds. The ship's shadow across the water speaks of countless nights spent under enemy fire, countless mornings navigating treacherous seas, countless hours keeping her crew safe. Her presence commands respect, not through legend, but through the reality of what she accomplished. For those who pause and reflect, the Massachusetts is a living testament to duty, loyalty, and the understated heroism that defined an era. Even today, she inspires reverence. Veterans, historians, and tourists alike marvel at her size, strength, and the precision of her design. Her massive guns, once roaring across the Pacific, now stand silent yet imposing, a reminder of what she accomplished. The ship itself becomes a vessel of memory, carrying with her the stories of men and women, of battles fought, of endurance proven. The hull, still gray, glistens under the sun, reflecting both water and sky, a mirror of the sea that tested her so fiercely. She is a monument to the unheralded strength of the Navy, a symbol of what happens when duty and precision converge, and a reminder that some heroes do not seek fame, but live on in the lives they protect and the history they shape.